Maya Thompson's life had always been ordinary, the kind of quiet existence that went unnoticed by the world. She worked long hours at a local insurance office and spent evenings caring for her home, rarely indulging in anything extravagant. Her marriage to Darren had once been full of promise, but over the years, the love that had brought them together had started to fade, replaced by routine and tension. Money was always tight, arguments about bills were frequent, and the spark of excitement that had once colored her life had all but disappeared. She often wondered if life had anything extraordinary left for her. One Friday evening, on a whim, Maya decided to drive to a casino that was not far from her neighborhood. She had always avoided gambling, dismissing it as a waste of time and money. But that night, she felt a strange pull, a mixture of curiosity and the desire to break free from the monotony. The lights, the sounds, the energy of the place, it was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. She wandered through the rows of machines, unsure of what to try, until a particular slot machine caught her eye. Something about it seemed almost inviting. On a whim, she inserted a few bills and pressed the button. The machine came alive, spinning reels whirring in a chaotic dance. Maya barely noticed what was happening, too caught up in the flashing lights and the thrill of anticipation. Then, without warning, the machine erupted with lights and sounds in a way she had never experienced. Coins poured out, bills stacked up, and a huge number flashed across the screen, $344,000. She froze, staring at the machine in disbelief. Her mind couldn't process the figure. She had not only won, she had won an enormous sum, something that could change her life forever. The casino staff hurried over, clapping her on the shoulder, guiding her through the paperwork and security checks. Every step felt surreal. She could hear murmurs of awe from the other patrons, whispers of envy and curiosity. The money, suddenly tangible, sat before her in neat stacks, a symbol of impossible fortune. Friends she called later could barely believe it. Social media posts began to circulate, pictures of Maya holding the oversized check spread quickly, and the story of an ordinary woman who had stumbled into a life-changing jackpot became local news. But even amid the excitement, Maya felt a shadow of unease. Darren had always been proud, sometimes overly so, and she sensed that his reaction to the news might not be as celebratory as hers. For the first time, she wondered whether this sudden windfall would bring happiness, or ignite conflict. That night, as she counted the money again in the quiet of their home, she realized that her life had shifted irreversibly. What had started as a simple gamble had turned into something far bigger than she could have imagined, a turning point that would set off a chain of events no one could predict. The glow of the jackpot light still lingered in her mind, but somewhere deep down, Maya felt a tension she could not name, a sense that luck, however dazzling, could come with a cost she had not yet understood. The days after Maya's jackpot win were not as joyful as she had imagined. At first, Darren tried to hide his disappointment behind a thin smile, but it didn't take long for the truth to surface. He began to scrutinize every decision Maya made about the money, questioning her spending, her bank transfers, even her casual thoughts about investing. It felt as though the windfall had unearthed a side of him she had never seen before, an edge of jealousy, a hunger for control. The man she had married, who had once been a partner in every sense, was suddenly critical, suspicious, and restless. Maya tried to navigate the tension carefully. She suggested practical uses for the money, paying off debts, setting up a small savings account, even taking a modest vacation. But Darren rejected every plan, insisting he knew better, that she was being reckless with their fortune. Arguments flared with alarming frequency, each one more intense than the last. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a battlefield. Even small disagreements escalated into shouting matches, leaving Maya exhausted and anxious. She felt trapped between fear and frustration, unsure how to regain any sense of control. The tension spilled beyond their home. Friends who visited noticed the strain immediately, Maya's forced smiles, Darren's terse comments, the way he subtly undermined her. She felt a growing isolation, as if the money, which had seemed like a blessing, was now a wedge separating her from the world she once knew. At night, she lay awake, listening to Darren pacing the floor or muttering under his breath, imagining the ways he might try to manipulate her or take the winnings for himself. Fear began to creep into her thoughts, a quiet, persistent shadow that she couldn't ignore. Maya also discovered that Darren had begun snooping through her personal accounts and phone messages, searching for signs that she might be hiding something. She realized the jackpot had not only exposed hidden tensions in their marriage but also unleashed a version of Darren she had never known, possessive, suspicious, and increasingly volatile. Every interaction felt like a test, every glance a potential threat. She started to wonder if the man she had loved for so many years was still the same man, or if the money had awakened something darker within him. Despite the growing danger, Maya found herself drawn back to the casino. The lights and sounds, once a thrill, now offered a temporary escape from the storm at home. For a few hours each week, she could leave her fears behind, immerse herself in the distraction of chance, and forget the simmering hostility of her marriage. But even there, she felt eyes on her, whispers of envy, a reminder that fortune often attracts scrutiny. Slowly, the jackpot that had seemed like a miracle began to feel like a burden, a spark that had ignited a fire she could no longer control. As the weeks passed, Maya sensed a change in herself. Fear and frustration mingled with the excitement of the money, creating a volatile mix. She no longer knew how to feel entirely safe in her own home, and she couldn't ignore the growing possibility that the life she had once known, the life before the jackpot, was gone forever. Something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly, and Maya understood that she was standing on the edge of a dangerous path. The money that had promised freedom had instead become a trap, one she wasn't sure she could escape. Weeks turned into months, and the atmosphere in Maya Thompson's home grew heavier with each passing day. Darren's anger no longer stayed hidden behind thin smiles or subtle criticisms, it had transformed into something sharper, more unpredictable. Every disagreement, no matter how small, seemed to explode into confrontation. Maya felt as though she was walking on glass, every step measured and cautious, hoping to avoid triggering another eruption. The once familiar rooms of their house now seemed suffocating, the walls echoing with past arguments that had left invisible scars. Maya began keeping careful records of her money and movements, noting every transaction and every visit to the bank. Her fear was not just of Darren's temper, but of the growing sense that he might act to take the fortune by force if he felt cornered. At the same time, she became increasingly aware of the public attention that followed her win. Casual acquaintances, distant relatives, even strangers on social media seemed to track her life, congratulating her one moment and casting judgment the next. Each post, each message, felt like a reminder that her life had irrevocably changed and that she could no longer rely on anyone to see the full truth of her situation. One stormy evening, an argument between Maya and Darren escalated beyond what she had ever experienced. It began as a disagreement about a bank statement and quickly spiraled into accusations, insults, and threats. Darren's voice, once calm, had taken on a dangerous edge, sharp and relentless. He accused Maya of hiding money, of undermining him, of disrespecting the life they had built together. Maya tried to stay composed, but the fear coursing through her was suffocating. In that moment, the weight of the jackpot, the money that had seemed like a blessing, pressed down on her chest like a physical force, reminding her of the danger she now faced. Maya made a decision in that tense, charged atmosphere. It was not a decision made lightly, but one born of desperation, fear, and a growing sense of inevitability. In her mind, she rationalized it as a way to protect herself, to reclaim control over her life and her fortune. She planned carefully, taking small steps to ensure that if the unthinkable happened, it would appear as an accident. She moved objects around the house, adjusted schedules, and created circumstances that she believed would obscure her involvement. Each action was calculated, her heart pounding with the awareness that one mistake could ruin everything. The night Darren died, a storm raged outside, lightning flashing against the windows and thunder shaking the walls. The house was tense with unspoken threats and fear. In a single, decisive moment, the fragile balance of control snapped. What had begun as a life filled with ordinary worries and sudden fortune ended in tragedy, leaving Darren lifeless and the home filled with a silence heavier than any argument. Maya stared at the result of her choice, a mixture of relief, fear, and disbelief flooding her senses. She knew that the life she had known was gone forever and that the consequences of this night would extend far beyond the walls of their home. By morning, the scene appeared deceptively calm. To any outsider, Darren's death might have seemed accidental, an unfortunate mishap in the midst of a stormy night. But beneath the surface, the truth was far more complicated, marked by fear, desperation, and a choice that would haunt Maya for the rest of her life. The money that had promised freedom had become a catalyst for destruction, and Maya realized that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. The morning after Darren's death, Maya Thompson moved through the house with a quiet, mechanical energy. Every step was measured, every gesture calculated. She cleaned, arranged, and repositioned objects, convincing herself that appearances mattered more than anything. To the outside world, the house looked undisturbed, the scene of a tragic accident perfectly ordinary. But Maya knew differently. The fear that had haunted her for weeks now became a constant companion, whispering reminders that a single overlooked detail could expose everything. Police arrived quickly after the emergency call, their faces serious, their questions probing. At first, Maya's story seemed plausible: a stormy night, a tragic accident, a husband who had slipped and fallen. Detectives took notes, photographed the scene, and collected statements. Maya spoke calmly, almost too calmly, aware of every word and gesture. She told herself that if she remained composed, nothing would betray the truth. Yet beneath her carefully controlled exterior, anxiety gnawed at her, each sound outside the house a potential threat, each glance from an officer a test she might fail. As days passed, the investigation began to dig deeper. Forensic experts examined the scene and noticed inconsistencies that raised questions. The placement of certain objects seemed deliberate, the angles of injury suggested something more than an accident. Police began reviewing surveillance footage from the area around the house and the casino, tracing Maya's movements with meticulous care. They discovered small trips she had made late at night, movements that had seemed innocent but now appeared suspicious. With every new detail, the net around Maya tightened, though she continued to maintain a composed facade in front of investigators. The financial trail added another layer of scrutiny. Detectives uncovered large transfers from the casino winnings into accounts Darren did not know about. The money that had once seemed like a blessing now appeared as a motive, a source of tension that might explain the sudden tragedy. Friends and family were interviewed, revealing the arguments and friction in the household, the growing strain between Maya and Darren. The picture painted by the investigation was beginning to contradict Maya's story, and the careful control she had relied on for weeks started to slip. Public attention intensified as details of the case leaked. Headlines described the woman who had once been celebrated for an incredible casino win now as a suspect in her husband's death. Social media buzzed with speculation, conspiracy theories, and outrage. For Maya, the outside world became an additional pressure, a reminder that her actions were no longer private and that every misstep could be exposed. Anxiety turned into fear, fear into a sense of inevitability. She understood that her fate was no longer in her hands, that the investigation would uncover what she had tried to hide. By the time charges were formally brought against her, the calm composure Maya had maintained had transformed into quiet despair. The evidence was mounting, each detail meticulously documented and catalogued. The carefully constructed story of a tragic accident was unraveling, leaving Maya to confront the consequences of her choices. The money that had once promised freedom had instead triggered suspicion, investigation, and ultimately, the certainty that justice, however slow, was closing in. She was no longer in control, and the life she had tried to protect was slipping away, piece by piece, under the relentless scrutiny of law enforcement. The trial of Maya Thompson began in a packed courtroom, the air thick with anticipation and tension. From the moment she entered, every eye seemed fixed on her, some with curiosity, some with judgment. The case had captured the attention of the community and the media alike. The story of an ordinary woman who had stumbled into sudden fortune, only to have her life spiral into tragedy, was one that fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Maya sat quietly, her hands clasped, listening as the prosecution laid out a meticulously detailed account of Darren's death, painting a picture of fear, greed, and premeditation. Witnesses took the stand, describing the escalating tension in the Thompson household, the constant arguments over money, and Darren's growing suspicion of Maya's actions. Financial experts testified about the transfers of the casino winnings, demonstrating how Maya had moved large sums without Darren's knowledge. Forensic specialists detailed the inconsistencies in the scene of Darren's death, explaining why they believed the accident was staged. Each revelation added weight to the case against her, turning what had once seemed like a tragic mishap into a deliberate act of violence. Maya's defense was methodical but fragile. She claimed panic, fear, and a momentary lapse in judgment. She spoke of years of tension, of arguments that had left her feeling trapped and threatened. She maintained that she had acted out of desperation, not malice. Yet, her calm demeanor in recounting events and the premeditated steps she had taken to cover the scene undermined the narrative of panic. The jury listened intently, weighing every word, every piece of evidence, every testimony. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a reflection of the stakes that Maya now faced. As the trial progressed, the story unfolded in layers, revealing the stark contrast between the jackpot that had promised freedom and the tragedy that had followed. Every argument, every decision, every act of fear and calculation was laid bare. The media coverage amplified the drama, broadcasting to the public the rise and fall of a woman whose luck had turned deadly. For Maya, each day of the trial was a reminder that her actions had consequences far beyond her control, that the life she had once hoped to protect had become the stage for her undoing. After days of testimony, deliberation, and mounting tension, the jury reached a verdict. Maya Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, a heavy, irreversible finality settling over everyone present. The $344,000 jackpot, once the source of hope and excitement, had become a symbol of destruction, a reminder of how sudden fortune could ignite fear, greed, and violence. Maya was led away, her fate sealed, a life of freedom replaced by a lifetime behind bars. The story of luck turned tragedy would remain a cautionary tale, a chilling example of how easily fortune and fear could collide, leaving nothing but loss in their wake.